and Lisa and Suzanne. So if I can invite you all to the chairs, these very comfortable chairs. Don't worry, Lisa and Suzanne don't need to speak, but to answer questions. Yes, these are your seats. You're in the cheap seats. So if you can all take a pew, please. And okay. You're all very cozy there, are you? Those look very comfortable chairs. Thank you very much. So, folks, what I want to do now is just a bit of a quick fire session to each of you who haven't spoken around what next for soil health, based on everything you've heard this morning in your respective areas of academia, policy, practitioners. What next in your world is for soil health? So, Phil, you sat there. It was your choice, so you'll start.
Okay, so two things I would like to say about the areas that I'm working in Soil Nutrient Health Scheme. Firstly, this is the first time on a scale like this that the farming community have been presented with nutrient management plans, soil nutrient plans for their farms, so field by field. So the undertaking is enormous. The scale and the ambition is enormous. It is the first time, I think, in the world that something like this has been done on such a scale. So what it gives farmers is the right kind of information to manage their farms in terms of nutrient management, but also it enables them to take a participatory approach in managing their soils for water quality objectives as well. So that's never been as important as it is, as has been noted for this year with the problems in Lough Neagh, and there's a direct link between nutrients on land and the pressures and the impacts that have been found in Lough Neagh. So it enables farmers to take that participatory approach, and that's a really positive thing. So that kind of the feedback, the two-way thing, the feedback is going to be really important to get from farmers in the years ahead. And secondly, alongside the nutrient maps, the runoff risk maps. So this is, again, very ambitious. It's never been done before at this scale of this resolution. But the runoff risk maps are based on a model. So the red and yellow hatched areas that farmers see on their fields are models. And it doesn't mean to say that there's no risk in any other part of the field. It just means that we've identified the highest risks. So what I'd like to know, or we as a team would like to know, is how does that reflect reality? And we're getting good feedback from a lot of farmers. This is airborne data. It's analysed in front of computers by a team of GIS specialists. But at the end of the day, it's a model, an abstraction of what could be reality. So we need that feedback from farmers, that interaction. And the last point related to that is, well, we've got these great maps. It's easy to know what to do with soil nutrient maps. We can plan our nutrient management with those maps. But what do we do with the runoff risk maps? Okay, so that is a really key question for not just the farming community, but for the whole spectrum from policy to farmers. What do you do with those maps? And I guess the maps are there to show where there is a route between the field surface and the nearest stream. It's a vector for that nutrient resource to become a problem, a pollutant, once it hits the water system. And the runoff maps are there to show where the disconnections can be made. So how can those disconnections be made? Now, there's good momentum there in the south, where there's been a lot of investment in trying to break connections through the ASAPs and LawPro schemes, brand new funding this last year, to break the connections where those runoff risk maps are indicating there's a connection between the land surface and the nearest water. So that's, I think, is a really important next stage to come from Soil Nutrient Health Scheme.
Thank you, Phil. And as a good academic, you've left us with more questions than answers. Thank you. Dave, as Director of Environmental Policy in DEER, then where do you see we go next with soil health?
Okay, thanks so much, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone for the invitation. I mean, it's been a very good day, I must say. First of all, I've really enjoyed it and found it, very fruitful and stimulating. I must say, when Paul gave his presentation before lunch there, peppered it with, this will be difficult for policy, this will be difficult for policy. I was sinking further into my seat, but then I thought to myself, well, actually, Peter Yan did a pretty good job on policy in the first presentation, so perhaps he's going to fix it for me. But, I mean, seriously, I suppose three things spring to mind, in terms of where next for soil health from a policy perspective. I suppose the first thing is about the baseline. Continue to establish the baseline, as many have said, that the soil nutrient health scheme, is going to do a fantastic job of that, that will establish where we are at the moment. There's probably a couple more years of that to go in terms of actually doing the sampling. There's also work we're doing around the edges in terms of some of the science, as you'll be aware, to try and just make sure that, as time moves on, we keep up with some of these developments and make sure that we are as up to date as we can be. And also, I suppose, just thinking about some of the presentations today for sort of maybe for the slightly longer term, in terms of the full definition of what soil health is, we're going to have a very good baseline on the soil chemistry and with soil carbon, some of the soil biology from what I hear as well. But just going forward, not to lose sight of that, we might need some work on the baseline there. I suppose then, having got the baseline established, it's about what are the targets, where do we want to be at a policy level, and putting some thought into that. As I'd mentioned earlier on in the Q&A, there is a requirement under the Climate Act to put in a target on soil quality, and we'll have to put some thought to that as to what in the short term is a reasonable target, a realistic target that both ourselves on the policy side, but stakeholders and land managers can understand and buy into, and how that evolves over time. And then, finally, having got the target, what policies do we need to put in place to move towards that? Obviously it's been clear from this morning and this afternoon's sessions that whilst soil in itself was perhaps the Cinderella of policy, particularly when it came to our time in the EU in terms of having its own specific legislation, there's a lot we can do now. We're no longer in the EU in setting our own policy direction. And recognising that soil is so important for most other natural environment policy areas. Phil's mentioned Loch Ney and water policy. We've got the peatlands agenda and peat soils, and that will be a large part of our work on land use change and forestry for the Climate Act. We're working on a nature recovery strategy, and soil underpins a lot of the natural environment in there. So there's a lot to be going on, both in terms of feeding in the requirements and the elements of soil into existing strategies and policies, and then thinking about, well, do we need something more bespoke for soils? And obviously that links into the new agricultural policy framework that the former minister signed off, and soil and nutrient health sits as a package under that. There's a really good interface, if you like, between the environmental policy elements of the department and the agricultural as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Elizabeth.
I'm on. There we go. Thanks, Dave, for that. It does strike. There's so many policies out there that soil's a part of, but yet, whether we need that focal point of soil, it's the chicken and egg nearly, isn't it? Question. Thank you. Paul is a senior researcher in Queen's then, and an academic on the panel as well. What do you see as the next areas of soil health that we need to be looking at?
Thank you, Elizabeth, and just echo comments about how excellent I think this meeting's been. So I suppose, thinking about my reflections, even the whole concept of soil health has evolved very quickly and continues to evolve. So if you're thinking about a couple of decades ago, the soil health was very much focused more on sort of fertility and then linking through to agronomy and yield or whatever. And obviously it's grown to encompass sort of human health and even further to planetary health. So with that aspect in mind, this whole idea of soil health is going to continue and expand. And of course, to try and meet that evolution, we've developed whole suites of different indicators. And I think from a science perspective, I think it's really important that we continue to do that, and we continue to scrutinize and the existing measurements and indicators, bring on board new indicators, and constantly have this dialogue, because that goalpost is continually shifting. And from a research perspective, some of those areas which I think it's shifting into, for instance, is how we kind of deal specifically with how the system, kind of the status of the systems. So we kind of still tend to think of soil as kind of very static. And of course, listening to the talks that we've heard today, we obviously know that that isn't really the case. And they are continually changing. So how can we integrate that into our indicator measurements? So it could be along themes of redox, you know, what's happening in a dry summer versus a wet winter, for instance, and how that then interplays with these indicators. And then I suppose from other areas which I think are areas of priority that we need to continue to focus on. I know that there's a deficit in terms of the soil biology, and there's a lot of soil chemistry out there. But I would also just like to kind of fly the flag for the soil chemistry, in the sense that still a lot of our fundamental understanding has been based around soils which have been collected in a disturbed way and homogenized. So quite a lot of our data still doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening in situ. So I see an ever-increasing kind of move towards a better understanding of kind of the microstructure in the soil and how that also interlays with the soil chemistry, and kind of continuing that theme, an area which I feel passionate about that is currently poorly understood, but I would say at a frontier of the soil chemistry world, is all these very small particles, so that's the soil colloids. So we know, for example, these nanoparticle technologies which are being developed, especially around fertilizers, their unique effects in terms of plant development and uptake and so forth. But there's just a whole wealth of kind of natural cycling of colloids that we still don't properly understand in the context of natural soil structure, with macropores and micropores and all that dynamic. So there's definitely still lots of work to do on the research front in many different areas.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Yeah, that's opened a whole new world for us there, talking about micropores as well. I was going to call you David. William, my head has gone blank. It's the end of the day. William, and I know you so well, so as the practitioner, 76% of land is farmed by folk like yourself. What do you see as what we need to do next for soil health, maybe to support the land user and the farmer?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's been a great event. I'll comment just on the soil scheme. You know, to me, it's the ultimate exercise in measure to manage. And the data's coming in, but the next crucial step is how that is implemented at farm level. And that is as big a piece of work as taking the samples. I take a lot of heart out of all that has been discussed today. The 92 million tons of nutrients that are sitting there waiting to be used. Fully accept they may be used in a different way, but that science, it needs to start with the science, so that the farm level operations know what they should be doing. And I was also interested, the alternative to the chemical fertilizers are coming, which may involve some of that waste. So I take heart from that. Regenerative farming has been mentioned a few times. When I hear that phrase, I think of what my father did and my grandfather did. So there's almost a complete circle of the wheel here. The problem is we have, agriculture has intensified and specialised for a reason, to try and stay viable. And I think it was Marcelo talked about what's agriculture for. It's for producing food, keeping rural farm families, rural economies vibrant and in a suitable manner. So like there's no end to challenges, but it's good that this work's going on, and there will be a way through. and I'm reassured by the science here today, but I always think nobody should underestimate the ingenuity of farmers as well. You know, so there will be a way through it. Yeah.
Thank you, William. So yeah, regenerative farming's a bit like my wardrobe. I keep it long enough, it'll come back into fashion. Patrick, as Deputy Chair of ArcZero then, can you share with us your thoughts? And ArcZero's done a lot of work on the soil carbon and soil health. So just give us your thoughts maybe on where we're going here.
Thanks very much. And it's been just a wonderful day, and every single talk has resonated very strongly with me and with quite a lot of what I'm about to say. First of all, I'm just going to give a little bit of background about ArcZero because the context is quite important here. ArcZero is a group of 7 farmers set up under a European Innovation Programme project in 2020 and we were set out to baseline our carbon. Our mantra is, as William has just said, to measure. You have to, in order to manage, you have to measure. And so we have done extremely detailed carbon audits on our 7 farms. And the 7 farms are distributed right across Northern Ireland and constitute a range of enterprises, a range of soils, a range of climates, for example, from 750 millimetres in the east of the province to 1,700 millimetres of rain a year in the west of the province, a range of soils and soil types, and a range of farmers, because we are all, as farmers, we're all totally individual and have our own preferences and ideas and thoughts. So we have done that. We have done, effectively, we've carried out the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme program on our own farms 2 or 3 years ahead of the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, but we've done it in even more detail than they have, and particularly the carbon measurement. And so we've come up with figures for our total farm carbon. And we've done our agri-calc and our carbon fluxes and flows as well. But through doing that, we've come to realize just how incredibly critical our soils are, and the realization that of our store of carbon in Northern Ireland, somewhere around 95% of it is held in our soils. Only 5% or so, on average, is in the above-ground vegetation. And there is the potential for those soils to sequester far more carbon than they have already. And it's all about soil health. And so we want to move, we've been determined to carry our project forward. And to do that, we want to investigate much more closely the whole business of soil health and what constitutes good soil health, how do you measure it, and how do you verify it. And so we're planning a program of work which involves looking at a whole range of indicators and seeing how relevant they are to our farms and how each of our farms scores on all of those. And these range, we've talked a lot, there's been a lot of talk about the physical, the chemical, and the biological. And I want to add a couple more categories to that. The first of those is actually environmental. It's been touched on already, which is about climate, about rainfall, temperature, geology, topography. And those, we've heard today how important those are. The second is the physical, the soil texture, the soil structure, the soil porosity, the compaction, bulk density, all of those critical to soil health and soil condition. The chemical, the pH, the pK, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and the calcium-magnesium ratio, the balance between them is vital. The CEC, the soil carbon levels, which overlaps with the biological, and the carbon to nitrogen ratios as well, which are all, indicators and measures of soil. We've done most of those already, so we are ahead of the game on that. Then there are the biological ones, and this is where we particularly want to get involved, looking at organic matter, about earthworms. We've done a pilot on that. Wider soil biota, so that's quite important. Fungi, bacteria, and the fungal-bacterial ratio, the ratio, proportion between them. Soil respiration. But then the one thing we can add to all of this is the human factor, if you like. The land use, the land management over the past number of years, decades perhaps, because our farmers in our group have been keeping records, have been keeping a measure of what they have done on what field and when. And so we can go back and look at how the past land management has affected the soil health in each individual field. And I think that's something that really hasn't perhaps been covered very fully today. It's been touched on, but I think that's something that we can bring to this, because we are, in our group, all practical farmers working day to day on our land. Just at the end, finally, what I would like to just say is that we are also very keen in doing all of this to investigate how we could find inexpensive and simple methods of measuring soil health. Because we've heard from said more than one person, and we've experienced ourselves, nearly all of these techniques can be costly, time-consuming, require laboratories and expensive equipment and so on. If we can find quick and easy ways to measure some of the vital parameters of soil health, it'll make a great deal of difference to everybody, and I think could improve our understanding and knowledge much more rapidly than spending very large sums of money in laboratories across the country, with due respect to the universities and the people and the research institutes who are doing it. But I think that's a key part of what we would like to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and don't worry, whenever we find a solution to RAPID, we'll be moving on to the next problem and the next piece of research. I would like to acknowledge Lisa and Suzanne in particular, and Paul, for bringing us a really fantastic conference today. You know, these two ladies and Paul were the driving force and the brains behind this collective conference as a whole. So I think quick round of applause maybe for those three folk in particular. But you're not going to get off that line. So, ladies, you have already spoke. I want one sentence from you on what you then think as your next soil health thing.
Okay, so I want to bring into this one sentence. The reason why I'm wearing bright green trousers is because I'm all about plants. And where I think we need to go in terms of soil health is looking at how different species and varieties down to variety level actually impact soil health, because I think that is really unexplored. Looking at maybe alternative crops, heritage varieties, etc., etc. So that is, as a variety tester and an agronomist and somebody who's interested in soil science as well, that's where I feel the focus should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and of course the manures, the feeds that. Yes. Maybe I stole your thunder there, Suzanne. No. Sorry. Go ahead.
So I want to say two things. First off, just from experience of working in research, I think trade-offs is extremely important. Like usually we're focusing on one thing at a time. We're looking at phosphorus, we're looking at ammonia, we're looking at nitrous oxide, but actually you can't look at one thing in isolation. They're all linked. We need to look holistically. You try and improve one thing, you have a negative effect on something else. So it's really challenging that way. And I want to talk about resilience because I think it's extremely important going forward. What we're trying to do is make our agricultural system more resilient. And I've just seen this myself running research trials, and these very mild winters we've been having. The grass keeps growing. The difficulty trying to get out and cut, put on fertilizer. It's just got more difficult. And I just think going forward, it's the resilience of farms and how difficult it is to manage land currently, and it will be going forward.
Thank you, Suzanne. So, folks, any questions there from the audience? I am planning to wrap up at 4, so miraculously on time. Any questions for our panel members? Yes, please. And there's a microphone coming.
Maize is known for being very destructive for soil. Some farmers in Wales have switched from maize to whole crop rye, which they can harvest in the middle of the summer. So I'd actually just like to see some work on maize and possibly encouraging farmers to move away from it. The other thing that I should have asked Paul at the time is that given the climate conditions, there's probably restricted opportunities for putting in cover crops. I mean, I've seen people, they've had a nice dry autumn, they put in a cover crop, they've managed to get it turned in before the winter. But then the following year, the experiment worked well the first time on a small patch, so he did the whole field the next year. It lay there till the spring. And then he had to spray it off. Now, putting in a cover crop and then using chemicals to kill it,
the climate
doesn't make
resilience.
sense to me.
Paul, do you want to answer that quickly, and then I'm going to come back to about rye, Lisa?
I think I have to mirror what Suzanne's saying. farmers are doing what the best they can actually do given the situation presented to them. So that's where cover crops are still the best situation. Them lying there over the winter has protected the soil structure and has also reduced the amount of leaching then from that. So
wouldn't it be better maybe just leaving your stubble in? You know, if you're
no, that's that's what the slides were showing. So it was the amount of nitrogen that could be accumulated by the cover crop in comparison to the control or fallow. So the slides and the species were showing though the amount of nitrogen, the amount of nutrients, and also in the poster outside that the cover crops could accumulate compared to stubble, which was fallow or very low weed growth. So again, it's that physical armour that cover crops do provide, especially in days like today, to reduce that energy from the rainfall and then leave a more open structure as much as anything, which improves infiltration. So yes, that farmer was presented in that instance per deck of cards, if you know what I mean, and the fact that per hand of cards, given the weather, but again, he still did the best thing that he could, and that is what agriculture is all about, is doing what the best you can do, and that's why we need to improve the information going forward to farmers.
There's even a lot of cereal in difficulty yet here.
Just a wee bit.
Due to the weather.
Yeah.
Lisa, do you want to comment quickly on the rye?
Cheers.
Thanks. I would just like to comment that actually I think in Northern Ireland the best thing for cover crops is to go over winter. And the best place for cover crops is over winter. Yeah. In terms of rye, in Crosnacreed we have done some winter rye trials, and I think there's huge potential for rye in Northern Ireland, but for all sorts of end uses, has a lot of potential as a feed grain, and also as whole crop, and it clears the land quickly for maybe cover crops to be put in. And also it's, my understanding is as well, it's relatively kind to soil. I think there's opportunities to explore with rye, and there's also quite a bit of rye is grown for AD as well. So it's an alternative land use that, on balance is of benefit to a farm, yeah.
William, I'm just going to ask you, alternative cropping, the protein crop scheme, even the rye agenda, where do you see, maybe we're very grass-based, but where do you see that, introduction of alternative crops maybe into that grass-based even rotation or farming system?
There's a great place for the rotational crops. Quite a bit of maize is grown now under plastic. My own personal experience, I grew maize for 18 years maybe. I'm back to winter wheat now, and a much simpler harvest in mid-August and mid-October. And actually I don't see any impact on performance, and that's the bottom line for me. A good crop of winter wheat is doing as much. But that alternative forage, it increases intakes and helps production.
Yeah. I definitely think they have a bigger role going forward for farmers. Any other questions? Yes? I'll put it to the panel in it. Go ahead.
On calcium to magnesium ratio, I don't know who wants to take this one, but it's something that I've been really quizzing on my farm. I believe it's my compaction issue, and seeing then today how high magnesium is a real issue for us here. I would contacted NRM to have an explanation for that, and they sent me a printout pretty much kind of saying, yeah, agriculturists around the world are all talking about this, but it doesn't apply in UK, our soils are so different. They didn't really want to address it, but I do think it's something here with our high magnesium issues that somebody needs to explain it to us and help us understand what is the levels we're trying to achieve in a sandy soil, a medium and a heavy clay soil where those ratios open.
Phil or
Suzanne? Yes, so we know about the calcium. There's an optimum calcium magnesium ratio where if that gets unbalanced, if there's too much magnesium, you can get sticky soils, or they can be very hard when they're dry. But a lot of the research has been done in the States. We haven't done a lot of research in Northern Ireland. I'm not sure, like even the UK or Ireland, it's not something that's been a priority in terms of research to fund. So we have put in proposals to look at this. It's never been a real priority to look at, so we've never really got the funding to do it. But so we don't have the answer to that. So I know farmers are getting very high magnesium levels in their soil results. We don't really, a lot of that now we're seeing it's likely to be the geology. So those fields are high in magnesium because of the underlying geology overriding how they're managing their field. So it mightn't just be from slurry, you know, there's underlying factors there out of their control, and that the magnesium in the soil is going to be high. We don't know how harmful that is. It doesn't have really environmental harm. Usually the plants only take up as much as they need and they'll not take up any more, but we don't know what's happening in the soil in terms of that ratio of calcium. We don't know if that's making the soil stickier here. It could be, but we haven't done the research on it.
What we had a seminar on this within Arc Zero, and brought, as someone came over, well, I was online, but someone from England who'd made a speciality of looking at this, gave us a sort of quick guide to it, and effectively, the calcium and magnesium have opposite effects on the on soil porosity, soil structure, with calcium opening up the soil and magnesium closing it down. And if you get the ratio wrong, your soils are going to be, as Suzanne says, they're going to be sticky, not porous, and hard for the roots to penetrate. And so it's crucial that you, if possible, you try to address this or get it into the right sort of zone or the range of optimum range. You know, that's something that we want to look at a little bit more closely. It's one of those things that hasn't been talked about, I don't think, and most farmers, I suspect, are quite unaware of it. But I think it is an important, it's a factor in soil health and soil condition.
But we don't know how to reduce really high magnesium levels. Some people say maybe adding gypsum and things, but if it's an underlying geology, you know...
she knows more about it than any of us.
So in terms of calcium to magnesium ratios, you need to be very careful. As we say, that magnesium is largely coming from the underlying geology. So if you're on a high mag rock, there's nothing you can do about that. But you can make sure you've got enough calcium. So it's important to look at the calcium in the soil, to measure it, and make sure it is, not in any particular ratio, but above about 1,500 as a number. Yeah, so that ppm of calcium is important, because that means the plant roots will have the calcium they need. The problem with any nutrient in excess, whether it of those cations, is they compete with each other. So if I had really high potassium, it'll get in the way of the calcium and the magnesium. So the plant roots kind of are competing against the soil surfaces to see all of those. So what matters is we have enough of each of them, but that when any of them is in excess, and that's normally because of the underlying rock, we then think about the others very carefully, because we need to make sure that the plant roots can see enough, that that one that's there in excess isn't swamping out the others. So on chalk soils in England, we see calcium getting in the way of everything else. And then I will say to farmers, you've got index 2 potassium, you think that's great. But actually on that really high calcium soil, you'll even get a response to extra potassium because that calcium's getting in the way. So it's important to be aware of the amounts, but not get over worried about a particular ratio. So all of those things matter. Most of them are driven by your underlying geology. And then once you know that soil type, that character of your soil, you can then think about how you direct your management best to make sure the plant roots have access to what they want. In terms of soil structure, calcium and magnesium behave exactly the same. This is a myth. They behave exactly the same. There is nothing different. They're both cations, they're both highly hydrated, and their interaction with clays are exactly the same. What we often see in high magnesium soils is also a high silt level, and that's the thing that then causes you a problem with structure. So it's that silt often accompanies high magnesium, not that the magnesium itself is causing the problem. And so we just need to be careful. It's really easy to see numbers and say things, and the data that comes from the States, even the man who invented it, whose name is used, Mr. Albrecht, actually looked at the data later and said there is no common ratio that can be used. His early papers get cited, but his later ones where he says, actually, I know they're both important, but there is no common ratio that can be used. So it's just really important that we kind of take that broad look at all of these nutrients and think about them in context of our soil types.
Thank you. Now we are at 4 o'clock. Any other questions? No? Panel, anybody like to add anything? No? So to wrap up, today was about trying to bring together the AFBI science programme on what's happening in soil, and I think we have shared with you a lot of research, of course, on soil physical characteristics and soil chemical characteristics, and that emerging work on soil biological characteristics. And in their totality, they equate hopefully to soil health. But of course the indicators, I think what we've really learned from today is the indicators are still very much what is the best indicators. And you know, to listen to Elizabeth and others, the different soil types are going to have an impact on what those indicators are, the geology, the area, the climate. So it's not just a simple fix of having a set of indicators either. They're likely going to have to be, by what I can determine from today, very specific to various land uses, soil types, etc., etc. So it's not an easy one to crack. But I think we're definitely in Northern Ireland well down the journey on having a lot of attention to our soils, especially with the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, which is wonderful. And this journey is going to continue. And as you can see today, it's all about the system as well. So it's about the underlying geology, to the soil, to the plant, to the manure that's put onto that, as well as the land use. So a lot of work underway, and hopefully today has given you a confidence that there is a lot of work underway. There's still questions to be answered, which will keep us busy for a wee while yet. But until the next time, thank you very much for your attendance here today, and I'm going to wish you a very safe home. Thank you.